Alright, so after a little bit of time, I've gotten around to making a tier list for Kerrigan Survival, for the survivors. And the tier list is going to be based off of what a Masters or a Grandmaster's player would find most useful to least useful. Tiers are going to be based on that rank or level of player. As you can see, this is quite a long video. I'll be putting timestamps for each of the classes I talk about. I'll be going into the general strengths and weaknesses of them, and my opinions of some of the more specific aspects of them. So feel free to skip to any of those that you're maybe interested in particular, or want to unlock, or just want to hear about in regards to why I rank them the way I do. I polled the Discord asking them what they'd like to see the tier list based upon, and Grandmaster/GM was the most voted, with gold not too far behind, so you know, might do another one at some point for gold players. But Kerrigan Survival is a pretty weird game where it's quite difficult to play, but at the same time doesn't have any real matchmaking. It's got a little bit of in-game matchmaking, but when you're getting into a lobby, it could be like people of all skill levels. So when it comes to the strength of a class, it kind of depends on a lot more factors than just how good a class is at, you know, like maybe how fast an eco is or how much damage their units do or anything like that. Quite a bit can come into what actually makes a class strong or weak. So I've got a list of 4 here, and it's a list of what I reckon are the 4 most influential factors when it comes to how high a class would rank on the tier list. And for Masters Plus, this is what I reckon is probably the most impactful to least impactful out of those 4. Starting with the general strength of a class, and that's relevant for all ranks except maybe new players, where the most important thing may be how easy it is to play the class. But for the most part, the general strength of the class is one of the most important factors. Things like simply their stats compared to another class. You'll see some classes that have +1 mineral income for a 50 mineral structure, whereas some others have 75 minerals for a +1 mineral structure. Things like that, and things like units as well, including the general tools the class has and how good they are at them. The second is how easy a class is to focus, for the Zerg to focus them, that is. And that's ranking at the top for, or near the top for Masters Plus players, because when you get into a public lobby, which I should have stated that's what this tier list will be based upon, it's more so public games, like general lobbies you'll play instead of pre-made parties. It's really important to be able to play a class that isn't just easy for the Zerg hunter or even defender to just put all their focus into that one person, because even though there are 7 other players in the game, often that is a winning strategy for Zerg. If a Masters Plus player gets into a pub game and they're with 7 other players ranging from bronze to platinum, usually one of the Zerg can full focus the Masters Plus player and have a higher likelihood of winning doing that than if they were to just play trying to deal with everyone. So being able to avoid focus both on your hero, so not getting sniped on your hero, as well as your economy, not having your economy constantly cleared or shut down. The third being how many win conditions a class excels at, and that can be things like, can they realistically win with a push? Are they good at pushing? Or are they good at basing? Are they good at focusing the hunter down, maybe chasing them down, or trapping the hunter? Could it be that they have really good map control and can overwhelm the Zerg? Or they can clear so much creep and put so much pressure on a defender? Things like that. And when it comes to that, usually classes with 2 or more reliable win conditions that they're good at are going to be a lot higher on the list than anything that has 1 win condition. Having 1 win condition that a class excels at is a huge detriment, where it can be almost similar to being like focused with your hero or your economy. If they focus on stopping your win condition, if you only have 1, it's going to be very difficult to win and very easy for them to do. Whereas if you've got a class that can maybe base and push instead of just push, it's a lot harder for them to deal with. And of course it's even better the more win conditions you have, but 2 I'd say is the minimum for any reliable class for a Masters Plus player. And then the fourth being how early a class can hit their win condition timings. Simply, the earlier the better, the more reliable it is, the less likely things are to go wrong. Alright, so let's get into the tier list. Thank you to Gabri for making this. I've gone ahead and separated the supports from the builders, which I will explain why in a second. And the classes I don't play or don't have much experience with, at least in their current state after a few patches, when compared to the ones I do. So we've got 3 classes down here: Aewyn, Engineer, Swann. Don't have much experience with them in the current state. So we'll start off with supports, and the reason why they're separated is because they're all going to be pretty low tier, and that's primarily because, well, simply, if all the builders on your team die, then you lose. So with a support as a high ranking player in a lobby, you're usually going to be the one that's going to live the longest, and if you can't end the game, then all those builders are going to die off and you're going to lose, which comes into the second problem, is that supports often either take too long to end a game on their own or with their own win condition, or they're more so about supporting teammates, which, if you're a high ranking player, supporting teammates that are lower ranking isn't the best use, or isn't the strongest thing you can do. So right off the bat, they're going to rank lower than the builders, almost all of them anyway. I think there's only like 2 supports I consider fairly good, maybe 3. So with Chu, that's another class. With some of the supports, I don't have much experience with either, because I simply don't play supports much. Chu, haven't played a single time in my life. Have I ever seen him do anything useful? No. So I want to place him at E rank, but I'll preface that by saying I don't have any experience playing it, only with seeing them on my team or versing them. When I verse them, their map control can get decent, but they do get outscaled quite fast. They can be somewhat of an annoyance sometimes, maybe saving an ally or providing some AoE somewhere, but really they don't do anything too well. Even with their map control, builders just do it way better, so I would have to place them at E rank. Dark Templar, probably D rank in the current state. We can rearrange this at the end. I'll put him at D rank for now. His win condition of killing Zerg by hitting them, by getting a lot of upgrades and hitting them, comes in way too late, and often needing a lot of levels as well. So usually you're working off of hitting Zerg after your team have based. So you're already relying a lot on teammates on that front to base and to be able to get XP off that, but also for that base to survive long enough, or for the survivors or the builders to survive long enough for you to be able to kill Zerg. And I think off of that win condition, he would be E rank. But currently, he's in a state where he can spam a lot of map control with observers and cannons, and it's not really a good carry strategy. It's not something that you would really want to play as a Masters Plus in the average pub lobby, where you're usually expected to do something to end the game. But it's a pretty good supportive tool to buy time for your team. Unfortunately, it often doesn't buy enough time for you to actually be able to kill Zerg, because it also slows down your eco a bit. But that map control can be quite powerful, so I'll place him at D. Delta Squad is one of the few supports I think is actually really good, even for a high ranking player to play, because they can get, I might place them maybe around bottom of C rank for now. They can get enough upgrades fast enough, with enough single target damage but also AoE, to provide enough support in a base to hold a majority of what comes in, whether it be the hunter or the unit spawned. You can do tons of damage to both of those things, and quite early on, and quite reliably, as well as being on multiple sides of the map at once. You've got 3 heroes, so it's hard to focus down. So pretty good on that front. However, at the same time, it is something where you're still relying on your team, and you're still, it's hard to close out the game by yourself, for sure. Even with like a maxed out Phantom, the Banshee, running down Hunter, it takes quite a while to do that damage. So I'd say at the bottom of C rank for now. So then we've got Elementalist. Another one I haven't played much at all. Have played against it a lot, have played with it on my team a lot. Almost always dies at the start and feeds, whether I'm Zerg or I'm Serv. But there are a few good Elementalist players that can survive long enough to do something without feeding, but to also be quite scary. However, in a pub game, or even a pre-made game, it's so rare that the Elementalist is, I suppose, a big threat. And I just placed him here for now. I probably would put him around D rank, lower than Dark Templar. He's pretty easy to kill later on in the game. Even with a good Elementalist, later on in the game he's fairly easy to kill, but if you can't kill him, like you'll see people like Darkstar play Elementalist and he's nearly unkillable almost all game, because he just gets so much income early on, while also having good micro and good spell usage. But the thing is, I don't think I've, at least not often, seen him be able to close out a game, because what the Zerg then does is ignore Elementalist and just kill the builders. The reason Elementalist is an E tier in my opinion is because there are some synergies you can do, such as Meteor on your allies' units, something like a Critterlord's Giga Blooms or any high damage unit that can hit the Zerg Hunter or the Zerg Defender and could just insta-kill them. And occasionally you get patches where Elementalist just has some crazy early ability that can insta-kill Zerg, like the Lightning Storm variants of Elementalist. But at the moment I think it's just too unreliable, too team reliant, and even when you do have that synergy with the Meteor and your allied units, even though that's a really good synergy and a bit more reliable, you're still very team reliant. Next is Nightingale. I'd probably put another one I don't have much experience with playing, but have played quite a bit with, and I like when it's on my team. I don't think it's a weak survivor, however I don't think it's a survivor that a Grandmasters or Masters player should ever play. And for that I would probably put them down maybe E rank actually, because if I have a silver or a gold player on my team playing Nightingale and they've kind of got the class down, I'm very happy about that, because they give me chronos, they give me vision, they boost me as the builder usually. However, if it were a Masters teammate or a Grandmaster's teammate, it's just so much of a waste, because instead of boosting me, they could be another builder on the map doing actual things that are particularly useful. So for a Grandmasters or Masters player, this is very low down. Same with Prophet, and Prophet I would put below Nightingale. Prophet's pretty much the same thing. You're able to boost your allies. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill or experience to get used to the class, so a low ranking player can use it and can be very effective at helping the higher ranked allies. But if the higher ranked ally has it, then it's just it's so difficult to actually get anything going in the game. There are a lot of games I've played with people like Chewbacca or Clydebot who like to play Prophet, and it's really difficult for survivors when matchmaking's involved, the in-game matchmaking, for survivors to pull much off, because you've got one of the highest ranked players on your team that the matchmaking is heavily influenced by, just being a support, and a support that doesn't really do much until, you know, either like maybe 40 minutes and they get enough damage to start damaging Zerg. You know, early on they have some explosive wards and vision. Chrono's very nice, but it's very supportive, not really what you want to see a high rank player playing. Kevin, another one of the few supports. I'd say Rattlesnake, Delta Squad, and Nightingale are probably the three supports I think are actually like good. And in this case, Rattlesnake and Delta Squad are the only two I think a Masters or Grandmasters player can actually use fairly well and have a somewhat reliable chance of winning. And I put Rattlesnake above Delta Squad because he's a bit more proactive in how he ends the game. Delta Squad usually ramps up really fast and then can defend a base early on. Rattlesnake kind of does the same thing, except he can defend a base fairly well, not as well as Delta Squad, but he also has the option to chase down the Zerg and do like 4,000 damage a hit. So it's a lot more reliable for solo carrying on, but it's still a support, and it's still something that's just not that reliable, I suppose, at getting that win condition early on. Because if you're versing a good Zerg, usually you're versing, like, as a Masters or Grandmasters player, usually you're versing two decent Zerg, or maybe a good Zerg and a decent Zerg. They're not gonna often let you get away with ramping that fast. You're gonna have a few salvages, and then if you play too risky, they're gonna be able to jump on you and kill them if you if you're chasing them down trying to hit them. So usually you do have to fall back on basing. Now, Scion's next. He's been changed a bit recently, and I'm not entirely familiar with the class. I have a decent idea of what it does though, and it's another one of those things, kind of similar to Nightingale and Prophet, but in a different way, where it's incredibly supportive. It's great at boosting the usefulness of a good teammate, but if you are that good teammate, then you're usually just boosting less skilled or less less experienced players and it's not worth it. So he's quite low on D rank. I'd probably put him, I don't know if I'd probably put him next to Dark Templar, but I'm not sure whether I'd say I'd prefer to have a Masters or GM Dark Templar or Scion. But Scion can do things like grant structures shields, can be very good with some synergies like a Technician or a Spirit, particularly Technician where you've got a choke and a wall, things like that, while also providing AoE where things like the Spirit is really lacking, or even a Technician is really lacking if they don't have the resources or time to set up something like siege towers. So it can be very good at supporting in a different way than Prophet and Nightingale, but similar to them, it's quite difficult to solo carry the game. Team Nova, that's been getting changed a lot recently. It got some big buffs and nerfs, but ended up being an overall buff, and being pretty good at like chasing down the hunter and solo killing them, but it's been nerfed so much recently, I think it kind of sits around the bottom with the other supports. Maybe around, I'd probably put them in this form. I'd probably order it like this. So I'd probably say I'd rather see a Scion than a Dark Templar Masters, but I'd also rather see a Team Nova Masters than a Scion. Team Nova can do things like get vision all around the map, cause some chaos with mind control tinkers, also push creep a little bit, and just be very hard to shut down because they are two heroes. And they can recall about, they can get ecos up on different sides of the map. Problem is, they don't have any real win condition anymore. Even before, when their win condition, they got a bunch of buffs to damage, their win condition was to hit Hunter, or hit the Zerg heroes and whittle them down. That's still kind of their go-to, except it's just worse now, and it's just not that reliable. Maybe I'd even put it below Scion, just because like there is no real win condition, and the win condition that they do have of getting that enough damage usually comes in like so late in the game, like up to an hour into the game, and you can't really be banking on that as a Master or GM player in a pub game if you're a support. Sjlerk, right next to Chu. I think it's an absolutely useless class. Probably above Chu. Sjlerk can do some early game chaos, killing off Ling Balls, even killing off tier 2 if they get fed early on, but then the tier 2 outscales them pretty hard. But then they've got no real, like later into the mid game. So at the start of mid game, you usually are decent, and early game, you're good. But then as mid game's getting further on, and then in game, and then late game, you do actually nothing. So even with your vision tower spams, I can't remember what they're called, they can be nice path blockers, nice bit of damage, but it doesn't really do anything for a class. So I would have to put it pretty low down. It's not very, there's no real win condition to her either. It's more so slowing down Hunter in the early game and then being a bit of an annoyance. And then maybe if the game goes like 40 to 50 minutes long and you're constantly hitting Hunter for like 20 minutes, then maybe you can kill them off. Warden, another nearly useless support. Same with Sjlerk. Warden and her are the same. Just ignore them. Who cares? Who cares what they're doing? Make a bunch of lings, they get fed, who cares? What are they going to do with it? Nothing, because they're useless. So they're down the bottom. The only redeeming factors these two have over Chu, in my opinion, from what I've seen, is that they can provide some AoE early on, and that's kind of nice in an early base or something like that. But at the end of the day, wouldn't you just rather a builder making units, preferably units with AoE, and just kind of fulfilling that role? So we'll move on to the builders now. So I've got Alarak. This is a shame because this is one of my favorite to play classes, but I'm gonna have to put it at like maybe top of D tier, bottom. We'll put him at bottom of C tier for now. Maybe change it around later. A lot of players seem to think that, particularly lower rank players, and I can see why after I explain why this class is bad in my opinion for high rank players. I see a lot of lower rank players thinking that Alarak is very overpowered or hard to deal with in certain games, and then you can kind of see it. You can kind of see it when they experience like a 10-minute Havoc spam base. 2-2 Havocs coming out at 10 minutes and it's just constant spam. Main problem is that the people that go up against that usually just haven't experienced how to deal with it yet. And then when they see how to deal with that for the first time, they can clear it out and then go back to base with a solid 2000 gas 14 minutes in. And basically all you have to do is spawn tier 2 units, you know, make some roaches if you're defender, make some piglets or hydras. And even Ling spam long enough usually wins. Certainly if he's solo basing, you're assuming he has teammates with him. But that's why that early game isn't that scary with Alarak when you get more experience with the game. So although he's got great early economy, 50 minerals for a +1 mineral structure, and it gets bonus for multi-level economy, so if you're making eco on 2 different cliff levels. But the thing is, you don't even need that because it's a 50 mineral structure for +1 minerals, which is incredible. So he can get really, really fast economy. He can get like 2/2s so early on, the upgrades, as well as making Havocs, which are a really good unit for their cost. But then the problem is, what do you do after that? Because Alarak, other than Havoc, Alarak's units are absolute trash. The Adepts don't do anything. The Archons and the Wrathwalkers are decent units until you factor in their costs, and then they're garbage units. And by the time you can afford them, they're often just instantly melted. So Alarak doesn't really do much. There's a fun strategy I like to do with him, which is trying to push all sites with Havocs. But then, of course, that's hard countered by Lurkers, because you don't want to put the Mind's Eye on it, the structure that gives units extra vision and detection, so you can see the Lurkers. But if you put that on a Havoc, the Havocs are just instantly dying anyway. And then the late game, there isn't really any for Alarak until end game, like 40+ minutes in. And that only comes if you're like constantly eating Wrathwalkers early on with the sacrifice upgrade. And then sure, you can get to level 22. It's really fun. I'd suggest trying it if you've never played it. It's really fun getting to level 22 and just 1v1ing Zerg hero and killing them. Hey, if they spawn Somps, run away. You've got a ton of escape. Do it again, and you just whittle them down. Problem is, it's a terrible strategy. It's not good, it's not strong, but it is fun. And you're basically having to troll to get there by eating your actual army, which you could have been making to win the game. So it's a fun strategy, but it's also very weak. You can just basically assume Alarak again doesn't have an endgame. And as Master/GM in particular, he's surprisingly not too easy to focus. When I first started playing the class, I was like, this class is too easy to focus, his eco's obvious, his hero's fairly easy to kill early on if you get greedy, and you should be playing greedy as Alarak in my opinion. But the more I've played it, I've realized you can eco pretty much anywhere, you don't need multi-cliff eco, you can recall so easily, you've got so much escape. So I'd have to say that's in his favor. It is actually a really quite hard class to focus down. And that's the only reason he's ranking higher than like bottom of D rank. Andor's just a shame of a class, because it's another one similar to Alarak where there's so many fun elements to playing it. I like playing it, but the difference between Alarak and Andor is, even though I like playing it, I can't, because it's just an insta loss every game and you can't do anything fun because the class just doesn't do anything at all well. And for that, he's probably around here. The only good strategy that I've found with Andor is spamming turrets around the map, which is also a form of economy, to get map control while also spawning Adepts and Zealots, which are low mineral cost units, but high gas cost, but you're getting a lot of gas from those turrets, and just getting mass map control and trying to beat Zerg in a war of attrition. But the problem is, he's not good at it, and other classes do it better, so it doesn't work out great. And then he's got no other real redeeming factors. He's got PDD, which stops enemy missiles from hitting anything. Pretty good spell, not enough to make the class worth it. He's got cooldowns to make units. It makes a drop pod, which blocks unit pathing, or like, so if a Zerg hero is trying to get into a base, you can call drop pods down in front of them, your units, and it'll block them for a bit. It's actually really strong. Nomad's got it as well. It's a nice aspect for a class. Nothing even close to making it a good class, but it is a nice aspect. But it's just not good enough. And then, like, what good units does he have? None really, because you've got Immortals, which are an interesting unit. They're like an artillery damage unit, but they don't do that much damage. They've got the Cleaning Bots, which are a tanky melee unit, but they're not really a good unit. So he just doesn't really do anything, unfortunately. And then there's Ares. I reckon I have to put Ares probably around S to A tier. We'll put him A tier for now, because I'm not too sure what I'm going to put in S tier yet. Got a general idea looking at these classes, but I'll think about it. Ares has fast economy. He's got good map control. He's hard to focus down because of his worker tunnels. If he does get focused down early, he can pick up his valuable eco into the Ares itself, which is kind of like a free salvage, as long as your hero's nearby. He has incredible late game. His units are almost all very good. Vultures are pretty good early on for, you know, your eco. You can get minerals so fast that the vultures come in such great numbers. The Goliaths don't really come into play. That's like the only unit he has that isn't very good. But the Vikings, they're pretty nice for like a mid-game push, just to add a bit of tankiness to your vulture army. And then late game, or not even late game, it's still mid-game really, you get siege tanks, which are, in my opinion, Ares siege tanks are, in my opinion, one of the best units in the game. And then warhounds, which have really nice tankiness to them, as well as good single target damage. And Ares has so many tools. He's got SCVs, which can repair a bunch of stuff, and they don't cost supply on him, which is unique to that class because they're also how he ecos. So he can repair stuff without costing him supply. He can make flashlights for vision, which is very nice. And he has probably some of the best early game, some of the best mid game, some of the best late and in game in the entire game out of all the classes. With the main key problem being his absolute lack of anti-air as an air hero, meaning if you're solo and Zerg spawns corruptors, it's over. It doesn't matter if there are ghosts in the game because missile turrets aren't going to kill a swarm of corruptors. So you absolutely rely on either one of your win conditions being pushing early on and ending the game, which he's good at, which if he didn't have that option, he would rank much lower. Or if you're basing, you need a teammate that is alive to build anti-air for you in some form. And of course, you don't really want to be relying on teammates, but it's not too much to ask for that little bit of anti-air. But then it comes down to whether or not you have an alive teammate that can fulfill that anti-air role. Like maybe you've got an alive, like let's say Alarak on your team. He doesn't really have any good form of anti-air, so it's a bit less reliable in that regard. Now I've got Artanis. Artanis is probably B tier in my opinion. Possibly A tier. He's around that range. He's quite hard to focus because you can get a mothership core out built on other sides of the map. You can recall around the map. You can get early map control, another important thing for a Masters/GM player, being able to do that. Usually as the high rank player, you're expected to control the map, but also be the win condition or the game ender. Problem with Artanis is, at least I find, that game ending aspect of him, he has a lot of trouble with. And that's why he isn't ranking higher, because he's a good baser, he's a good pusher, but he's not great at either of those until the game goes on further, in which case he's a great baser because Reavers are incredible, but you need that eco to get there. Now his eco is pretty hard to shut down, because if he salvages and makes motherships, you can rush corruptors or hydras, but a good Artanis player will be able to recall them pretty easily, because the mothership has vision around it quite a lot. So he's hard to shut down when it comes to eco, but his eco isn't fast enough to place him higher than where he'll end up being, in my opinion, which will be around bottom of A tier or top B tier. Ascendant, probably around C tier. Has some interesting strategies, has some hard to focus strategies, hard to shut down. But even with like completely untouched eco, you never salvage, it's still like pretty difficult to win a game as Ascendant, or at least to close it out. When you're up against 2 decent Zergs minimum, they're usually going to be able to hold a push with tier 2 units or lurkers versus your units. Your units being the hybrid destroyers, the ranged ones, and the behemoths, the big cleaving ones, which have detection. But still, lurkers just melt through that army. It's hard to base because Zerg just, again, melts through your army with tier 2 units. And if it's a class with dash, it's very easy for them to get to your unit production, which has very low health. Just take care of that, and then you have to try and build some more unit production instead of building units. Very easy to shut down his win conditions, but it is hard to stop him from going through the game without eco. So he can get that eco, just difficult for him to win. Main reason he ranks as high as he does is because he can get that Void Ascendant form, which is kind of good and bad. It's bad because it makes you targetable by Corruptors and Brutalisk's anti-air attacks, which means you can't do it solo, because you can't defend from Corruptors and like Somp or Bane spam, but you can do it as a bit of a supportive addition to a base for your team, or to snipe down like a low health, like 10,000 or less health Zerg hero. So that's actually a very nice option for him. Champion is almost always, in my opinion, pretty bad when it comes to solo play, when it comes to the average pub game. But with one or two good teammates can become quite strong. I find Champion's biggest weakness is, other than insane gas costs, and your only mineral only unit being one of the worst in the game, is Centurions, is that he's pretty unreliable. I would put him above Ascendant for sure. I'd probably put him in B rank. He has some really good gas units. So things like a few stone avatars, great AoE options in a base. His Taldarins, great single target damage and tank options in a base. Stone avatar's also good at tanking. Later on, the hero zealot, I can't remember what it's called, Caldalis or something. Pretty kind of bad unit, to be honest, if Zerg micros their units, which is the main problem with it. Like, you're not ever going to be able to hit a hero because they can just move away and they're faster than you. He doesn't really have any spells or a leap or anything, so he can't really do much other than be like a front line in a base, which can be useful, and it can be useful to put your champion in the in-game just so you don't get sniped and die. And then the Talus, which provides him a lot of mid-game mobility and map control. You can poke creep and then shade out without being hit, or at least without taking too many. And it can have some really nice damage output with your soul inhabiting it. Once you get level 7, you can burst down Hunter quite well. So Champion's got a lot of options, but it's almost like a support builder where you want your teammate to be the core of the strategy of what's going to win the game, and then you can fulfill whatever role they're lacking in and help to carry there. But if you're on your own, you're out of luck basically. And for that reason, it's not very reliable and therefore not great for a Masters or GM player. Critterlord, I'd have to put A tier. He has a lot of different tools and really weirdly unique ones as well. So he's got his economy structure, which has a ton of vision on it. It's like building a flashlight and economy in one. That means you can economy all about the place and provide vision while also getting a little bit of minerals back from it, and also be able to have complete vision around your economy for free right from the bat, and it opens them up to being really easy to mass economy with. And I don't just mean in one place, I mean all around the map. You can make like 5 different economies, or at least as a higher ranking player, and have a pretty easy time managing them because they just give so much vision, so you can see what's coming towards it. And because you can do that, it's also very valuable on him to mass +2s, +2 economy. So 75 minerals for a +1, the base building, and then you upgrade it to +2 for 75 minerals. And that is a very efficient form of economy, and it means you don't need any gas, at least not early on, which means you can focus very heavily on economy. He has some interesting units. He's got the 25 mineral chickens, and I believe it's either 75 minerals or 100 minerals big chickens, like emus, the Carracks. And they are really good tanking tools, although I haven't been making much use of them anymore because I've been opting for other units, like I don't know how to pronounce it, his 250 mineral ranged unit, the purple one. Pretty good DPS, pretty good at killing lings, funnily enough, because they have splash damage. They're really good for clearing lings, decent for clearing tier 2. Decent bulk for the army later on. You've got the Giga Blooms, the big spore towers that just do a ton of damage from across the map to the hunter and stuff, and that's often a very good win condition to have, whether it be out of desperation or just to add to a base. And it's always something that the Zerg has to look out for when versing Critterlord. And it's just so hard to focus him down because of his move speed on his hero, the massive economy he can get across the map, the different forms of units he can get, the lava crabs, which I haven't mentioned, which can provide a lot of map control. I can't speak too much on the strength of them at the moment. I've been messing about with them, looking at different strategies to make them work. I think they're very good units, but also very conditional. But that's another thing here. The lava crabs are 10 minerals, 2 gas, incredible gas dump. If you've got like 300 gas, just spam lava crabs in the front of a base and it's a ton of body block. That's another thing, his upgrade structure, 150 minerals. I can't remember the exact stats on it, I think it's like 300 health. It's incredibly tanky. So you can just spam that in front of the base as well. He has a lot of options, and a lot of different win conditions that he's actually very good at. I'd say like 3 that he excels at. He's a great baser, he's a great pusher, and he's a great map controller. He's also decent at trapping Hunter and bursting them down with Giga Blooms. So a lot of options and a lot of good options. That's why Critterlord is up there. DJ, that's a hard one to rank. It's been changed a bit recently. Before the changes, I would say DJ's at like top of B tier, maybe A tier. And that's just for Masters or GM. The reason it wouldn't be higher is because it's fairly easy to focus. But the laser shows were one of the best units in the game. They had an AoE ability, so not super reliable AoE, but it's nice to have. And it can get you a lot of gas and be nice to clear things out where your teammates build AoE, and like some of the highest, if not the highest, single target damaging unit in the game, some of the highest DPS. And you can just absolutely melt Hunter, especially with the DJ hero giving a speed boost, movement speed. Just run up to Hunter, trap them, and just hit them with 6 laser shows, and it's like 50k damage. DJ got a ton of nerfs, so I'd probably say it is probably below Alarak in reliability of winning a game. It's easier to focus. Its win condition, which used to be like synergizing with teammates usually with laser shows, thing is you could do it so early that it would, even for a high ranking player in pub games, it could be fairly reliable because you could get to those so fast. But now he just doesn't really excel at anything. He doesn't have any real strength. His pushing is not great, and it puts his hero at risk. And if you don't push with hero, your entire army is very easy to kill, even utilizing recalls and such with the manager. He's not very good at basing. He takes up tons of room in bases with his economy size and how much economy he wants. He has some interesting support synergies by being able to heal anything with his heal ability, and well, it's mostly that that can create some interesting synergies, but it's not very strong. Energizer, I don't know what to say about Energizer, to be honest. It's in such a weird position. Like right now, Energizer is either like S rank for Masters and GMs or like D rank. If you can pull off very specific strategies that require teammate cooperation, he's like S rank. But that's the thing, you need that teammate cooperation. So usually, like if you see a Masters Plus player in a pub lobby pulling off some crazy like 5-minute base or something, it's usually because he's in a party with like 4 or 5 people and they're ready to synergize with him. And then usually like one or two of those people get zerged, but then he has like 2 other teammates that can synergize with him. But when he's solo, if he's solo, he's like D rank, it's so hard to do really anything other than cheese the opponent. Like you try and cheese them with crazy fast early damage with like a bunch of dominatrixes, or like a really early base with the discharger and charger combo, or maybe hunting down the hero with like an early Beyblade hero, or even trying to snipe some early economy, which I've been trying to work on a strategy for, but haven't got to try it yet, so I can't say whether or not that's a reliable strategy. But without a team, he doesn't have any reliable form of game winning condition. He's another one that I think is like a support builder, kind of similar to Champion. So maybe I should place him here as a bit of an in-between, because like with that team, he can be so oppressively strong that it's a bit ridiculous, and I have no doubt he's going to get nerfed soon because of it, which is another reason it's hard to rank him. But then without that team, he's like nearly useless, at least in my experience. So I'll place him next to Champion, and I'll say a bit lower just based on how unreliable he can be, based solely around how the lobby looks and who gets Zerg. So we got Helios. Helios is something that has an interesting economy where it's very hard to shut down. It's very hard to pinpoint where their economy is going to be. It's invisible. Most games I play as Zerg, I'm just assuming that I go in with the assumption that I will never ever kill a Helios piece of economy. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but the game plan revolves around never actually finding her economy, because that's just relatively likely, to be honest. So from that standpoint, that's great. She's hard to focus down her economy. She can jump up and down cliffs, which with some good micro or some good map awareness, not often going to lead to a death on Helios's part. With bad micro, it's very easy to kill her though. But if we're talking about Masters or GM players, it's going to be real hard to kill a Helios. Further survivability with the Moon, the warp prison hero, but that comes in a bit later, but that's a nice addition to it. But then we look at the win conditions, and it's like she doesn't really have anything too reliable. And recently she got a bit of a nerf as well, which surprised me, to the cost of her unit production, some of them, the Archons and Zealots. I would probably put her Like, if I'm thinking, if I see a Masters or GM player in my lobby and I see them Helios, I'd probably rather them over... Like, I'd rather them be Helios over Ascendant. I'd probably rather them be Helios over Champion and Energizer as well. So she can get a lot of map control. She can get, well, an absolute ton of map control. She's one of the best of it if you're fast enough. There's some really fun strategies that I like to do where you just absolutely take over the map. But she's not really, it's not really a solo win condition. It's not something you often want to be relying on if you're the sole high rank player in a lobby. So then you look at her bases and it's like, her basing kind of sucks too. Again, that relies on teammates. You want a teammate early on. You can provide a lot of constant unit spam. Like early in the game, a ton of Dragoons spamming. Maybe pair that with an XP leveling hero like a Warfield or even supports or something like that. But again, you're very much a support builder relying on teammates. Then you look at her push as well. Similar to her map control, it's very good, but you're still relying on teammates because your push rarely will be able to end the game unless you get really ahead or like play really, really fast. And even then, it's not always likely. And then she doesn't have any reliable form of lurker detection because she does have Corsairs, which have detection. But trying to fill up the map, micro different pieces of economy to make buildings, keep Helios alive, and make sure all the units are going in the right places, and Corsairs are also following those units or going around the map looking for lurkers and knowing where lurkers is. It's so much to take into account. It might work out for a little bit, like maybe you see lurkers and they're in the same place, you send the Corsair units in, kill it, then they make new lurkers and it's just very hard to keep up with Helios when she's solo. So it's again something you kind of rely on your teammate to get detection for if you want it to be a reliable win condition. So I'd say B rank. I'd say around here. Like these three, funnily enough, looking at all of these, maybe a few others kind of line up with this playstyle, but they seem like support builders. They're builders, but they support the team. It's very hard to solo carry with them. Mira's kind of weird. She sucks, basically. She sucks. She doesn't have that great of scaling. She doesn't have that great of pushing or basing. Certainly not solo basing. And like there have been so many games I've been in where I've seen a Mira that's gone like untouched and just never had to salvage eco. But it's like when it comes to base, they're still not the most useful in the base because the units just aren't there. Funnily enough, her best aspect is probably her ability to nuke, which is very strong, but it just doesn't make up for everything else. Cyclones, her late game or latest game unit, get outscaled really hard because once Zerg get 3 armor, the Cyclones do damage very fast, but a small amount of damage. So the armor just completely counters them. Especially if you see something like a high level Kerrigan where she's got like 50 armor, you're just not going to damage her. You're just going to do like 0.5 damage per hit. And then there's the other unit, late game unit, which is tanks, which are just probably the worst variation of tanks in the game, the weakest. They're not as expensive as some others, sure, but I just don't. I don't think they're particularly strong. They're more so something you see when a Mira tries to early base and support a team, and then it's like, personally, I'd rather see someone doing that with Ares, for sure. And then her pushing just isn't great either. She has some decent fast units like the Vultures and Outbacks. Pretty decent combo. Decent isn't good enough, so I'm going to place her at D rank. Nomad is something that has one of the most compact ecos in the game for a builder, so can quite reliably get a lot of economy relative to him. Problem is, economy relative to him is still not very much. It's slow economy, so like you usually can't, even if you never salvage, which sometimes happens because the economy can be so compact, sometimes you just can't hold a base or push or do any of that. He does have a lot of utility to him. He's got the cooldowns, which can block. I reckon he'd be better than DJ, but maybe around there. He's got the cooldowns, which can block things when he makes units. He's got the flying hero that also levels and can provide some really powerful spells and really powerful synergistic spells sometimes with combinations like the PDD, blocking ranged attacks, the shield, things like that. He also has flashlights, which some of the best buildings in the game, to be honest. Flashlights are very powerful. Having that option to make vision for relatively cheap, but also having the option to make scans as well, is great as anything, whether it be a supportive teammate or a carrying teammate. So he's got a lot of utility, but not a whole lot of actual, carrying to him. When you think of his units, they're not that strong. Black Hammers are decent, but they're not very strong. The Firebats are decent early game, and then they get tier 2 and they do nothing basically. And usually, the Hellbats that is, usually they just get overrun by Lings unless you set up like specific like channels or chokes for the Lings to run into. But then he just doesn't really have anything. So he has no great carrying capacity, in my opinion. Scientist, I've always seen him as kind of similar to Nomad, but if Nomad weren't so supportive and were actually able to kind of take the game into his own hands. But that's not to say that Scientist is particularly good at it. I'd probably put him above Ascendant. I didn't mention Ascendant's Cloud, but that's also a very strong factor to him. But Scientist, the way I see it, you're usually going to have to make mini base ecos. You're usually going to have to make a lot of ecos. It's usually going to be pretty easy to find the ecos. And if you salvage more than a couple of times, it's going to be hard for you to carry. Now, he does have flashlights and scans. He does have some of the, like the Marines, 25 minerals, an incredible early game unit. It does get countered by some things, sure, but the damage of Marines is incredible for a 25 mineral unit with stim. And you can do a surprising amount of damage to a hunter or anything like that in an early base, especially when combined with the hero unit Magellan, which can reduce armor and give even greater attack speed and all that. Has some of the best in-game out of all the survivors. Marauder spam is a very hard thing to deal with when you assume Scientist has infinite eco and he's just able to constantly spam those. It can sometimes solo Zerg if they don't have enough economy, but it also takes a very long time to get there. So usually not a huge factor to take into account, but sometimes you get there and you have a teammate alive as well, and it's a very hard thing for Zerg to deal with. But he's just too slow, in my opinion. Too slow to get to a strong push unless he has salvaged like 0 times or 1 time. If he's salvaged more than that, usually it's too slow in my opinion, because flashlights with scans and stim Marines with 1-1, some of the best early game push in the game, but you have to pretty much not salvage at all, or salvage once, like I said. Otherwise, you're just going to get outscaled by tier 2 units like Defender making roaches. And then after that, everything's just too slow for him. Everything's too slow to get to his carrying point or anything like that. Selendis, I have to put. I'm definitely putting her at the top. Question is, do I think she's stronger than Ares? And do I think Ares is S tier? Well, let's assume S tier is out of the question for now. All the top tier is going to be A until the end, and then we can see which is like the best 2 or 3 out of those. I think Ares is better than Selendis for a Grandmasters or Masters player, particularly because Ares' main drawback is like incredibly strong. Main drawback is he's clunky and takes a ton of APM and a lot of map awareness. So usually with Masters and GM, they can make up for that weakness. Selendis, really strong because of how consistent she often is. Now with Cybros, you can, even after salvaging early on, it's pretty reliable to constantly be strong in the game. To have map control as Selendis, to have eco around the map as Selendis, you're one of the few builders or few classes that have cloaked economy, especially self-cloaking economy. And so that can be very unique to have to deal with for Zerg, especially if you're a Masters or GM and you're going to get focused. Often that's going to have to lead to Zerg focusing eco locations that are entirely unique to Selendis, because she could eco anywhere in the middle of nowhere. They might have to rush overseers, things like that. You also have you have very good units, both in stats, like compared to all other units, but also for their cost, they're pretty cheap. Immortals, Selendis' Immortals, some of the best in the game. Even into the late game, they're really potent units. But you can pump them out mid-game, and it's an incredible army. The Colossus, pretty strong, a great form of AoE. You usually use it to kind of fill gaps in an army because it is something that's easy to deal with for Zerg by countering with what units they make. But if you're with teammates, then usually you kind of fill gaps in what your army needs. Maybe make some Colossus. So it's a great option. The Scouts give like probably the best anti-air in the game when it comes to a unit as opposed to a hero. Maybe with a few exceptions like Sergeant Hammr's Thorson, but they melt Corruptors. They are single target, so you know, balls of Corruptors can still sometimes be a bit difficult to deal with, but you only need to make a few Scouts to usually deny Corruptors with a little bit of micro on your heroes as well. And then your Stalkers and Zealots, both great early game units. Sentries, pretty interesting unit. You can play playstyles mostly utilizing the force field that makes it very hard for Zerg to deal with you if you commit to that playstyle, such as maybe they know where your economy is, you make some sentries, they send Ling Ball, you force field the Ling Ball and farm them, and they can't do anything to get through it, at least not in the early game, without sending the Hunter. The shield regen on them is also quite nice. It's a really good all-round class, reliable class, has good win conditions with excelling at map control, excelling at single target damage on the Hunter, excelling at basing, pushing, and does not have bad AoE, has AoE as a fairly solid option. They also have the two heroes, the Cybros, which no longer is that strong when it comes to the leveling, when it comes to the laser, because of how delayed it is. I can't say that that's a strong aspect anymore. It used to be, but now it's so delayed that the option to hit Hunters with it, or hit Defenders, hit the Zerg heroes, it's pretty much out of the question, unless they're not paying attention for like 10 seconds. So it's not really a strong factor anymore, but the Selendis Mothership is still very strong, and the laser from Cybros, both of them once you get level 7, the laser from Cybros is still fairly nice to buy a little bit of time in a base. Maybe they send a wave of Banes, and you laser that, but then of course it's on cooldown for like 2 years, and within that time they can make quite a few more Banes, so it's not really a huge factor. The Mothership though does have some really nice DPS to it, has some AoE with the Thermal Lance, very strong all-round class. The spells on her as well, decent. She can recall all over the map with the Nexuses. She can recall to her. She can gain more energy with one of the spells, which, you know, doesn't seem like a huge upside because the downside is that she needs energy. But it's a very important spell because that is one of Selendis' downsides, which there are a few of in my opinion, and it's by far the biggest downside in my opinion. So being able to regain that energy, and then the time warp, the slow field, is very nice. Sergeant Hammr, despite what everyone says, I don't think the class is that strong. I take that back. I think it's a good class. I don't think it's insane strong like some people say. I think it's simply strong. I would put it A tier. Well, I might have to take that back too. When I'm considering that this guide is for Grandmasters and Masters players, Sergeant Hammr is a ridiculously easy class to deal with if you're a good Zerg player. And if you're a GM or Masters player, you're usually going up against at least one good Zerg player. So I would probably put it... I'll put it here for now. I will put it there. The reason being is the economy is so obvious for anyone that has a bit of experience with Sergeant Hammr. That's the main thing, right? Not many people have that feeling for how Sergeant Hammr behaves or how they play, because it's not a very popularly played class from what I've seen. It's a very clunky class, so it's hard for newer players to get into it, and then not a lot of the more experienced players play it. But once, like if you are an experienced player that has played Sergeant Hammr a bit, and you're decent at Zerg, you're going to be able to shut down Sergeant Hammr so easy. I've definitely never played a game of Zerg where Sergeant Hammr has even come close to useful, and I rarely see it on my team where it is particularly useful. Which sounds weird to put it at a high B rank then, but Sergeant Hammr does have incredibly fast scaling, can snowball probably one of the fastest in the game, maybe only outskilled by an unfound Alarak eco. But the problem with Sergeant Hammr is that eco that scales so fast is so easy to find, so predictable because of how the add-ons work. You need a 3x3 structure, and then to the right of it, to the bottom right of it every single time, you need a 2x2 structure for an add-on. And that limits so many eco spots for a Sergeant Hammr. On top of that, very easy to shut down with Zerglings. And a little bit of micro. If the Sergeant Hammr is good, just micro some Zerglings versus them, and if once you get good at it, it'll be very hard for them to eco, especially because they usually have to defend their economies because of how oversized and clunky it is. Their game-winning conditions, Sergeant Hammr is really good at. There is the classic Luftwaffe, however you pronounce that in German, which is an abysmal strategy, but very fun, and I enjoy playing it. But it's one people point at and think of it as a good win condition, but it's very, very easy to counter if Zerg build any spores or any hydras or look at the minimap. So that's kind of out of the question. What Sergeant Hammr does have is Hellions and Hellbats, which are an incredibly strong unit, and they can push around the map, and you can get some cheap vision on them as well with Sergeant Hammer's variant of flashlights being able to get upgraded and give a bit of extra vision and detection to particular units. Also, because you snowball so fast, it's not out of the question to afford unit vision early on. So Hellions can be great at pushing back creep or pushing. Sergeant Hammr probably has the best basing in the game, with Ares being just a bit behind it in my opinion, because Sergeant Hammer's Thor units, the single target and the AoE, incredibly powerful in-game units. And then I haven't played since this got added, but there is now a Fenrir upgrade to Sergeant Hammr, where if you get the Imperio on both tanks that are alive, which costs you a total of like 100k to get those both Imperio. Before Fenrir was introduced, I played Sergeant Hammr quite a lot, and I played with Imperio. Once you get Imperio plus a maxed out army, even if you're a solo baser, it can be very difficult for Zerg to break if you micro it well. Eventually you will go down for sure if you're solo, but it's very difficult for them. However, now Fenrir has been introduced, and I'm not entirely sure about how it works. I've only seen a bugged version of it when it got released on its early release, so I can't speak too much to its strength. But the main point is that Sergeant Hammr is very easy to shut down, very easy to predict, and that's the reason he ranks so low despite having such powerful economy and powerful units. He also has, it's worth mentioning, the mines that he has. Also a great early game unit, but still one of those things that are hard countered by Zerglings being microed, which you can assume is going to happen when you're playing against decent Zerg that are also going to focus you. So we've got Spirit. I mean, I'm not... Spoilers, I already know she's going to be S tier. Before the recent changes that buffed her markets and gave her the most minuscule ever nerf to her health upgrades cost, I would have said she was top tier. Maybe not the top. I probably think she's the top now. Although I'll think about that a bit more once we get to it, because I'm not entirely certain. But she has incredibly fast economy, and an economy that relies heavily on gas, which is very important to note, because as the Master or GM player, you're often expected, once again, to get all that map control, but also to finish out the game. So if you can boost your economy by getting map control, compared to not getting map control, you're incentivized when it comes to your economy and getting closer to your win condition of ending out the game. By getting map control, that's a huge bonus. The difference between a gas-hungry economy, a gas-hungry eco class like Spirit and one like Champion is that Spirit's actually good at spending her minerals to get map control, whereas Champion is terrible at spending his minerals to get map control. So it's a very powerful aspect of Spirit. They also have two very strong game-ending scenarios, one being map control, a lot of map control with huge amounts of turrets. You can slowly push back creep and Zerg as they run near your ecos. You can hit them, and in base you have these incredible towers that are both ridiculously tanky and have ridiculously high damage, but they're single target and you get very hard countered by Lings and Banes. So you definitely rely on teammates, but despite that often being the factor that lowers something below an A tier for these classes, Spirit can just do it so early while also gaining early map control that it's reasonable to have teammates alive by then, and reasonable to have a lot of them as well. So the recent buff, which gave like a boost to economy, I think it was a 3% increase in the outcome for markets. So with Spirit, the markets are random, and they have a random chance to reduce how many minerals you put in with each tick or increase it. Basically, the likelihood of you getting a better outcome has been, I believe, by 3%. And it has sped up her eco so much that it is basically why I put her at least in the top 2. Maybe, yeah, I think it'd have to be the top 2. I doubt she would go down to a top 3 at the moment, because her economy is just so incredibly fast. You're looking at things like I believe I played one game after the patch just to see what it's like. I had like 40,000 minerals by 18 minutes, which is by no means a record, but it seems from how I've played a few games after it and from seeing other people play it just for a few games, it seems pretty consistent to get a lot of minerals. I reckon having like 20k to 30k minerals by 14 to 15 minutes is pretty reasonable, pretty likely even. So you have a very, very early window to begin ending the game basically with your Spirit, and it makes her, ironically, despite her being the RNG class, very reliable and consistent. Especially when paired with the fact that you're getting a lot of map control. You don't have to rely on teammates for that. Stukov is something that's somewhat easier to focus early on because of his unique revealing of his own hero in Fog of War when he attacks something. And the reason it's unique, where other classes do that, is his lasts for quite a while. After you attack a Ling or something, you're farming Lings, you run away, they will have vision for you for like 1 or 2 seconds. So usually you have to, fake them out, assuming they're watching you in Fog of War, fake them out, run one way and then run another. But it can make his early eco somewhat easy to find, but he can also reliably corner eco early on, and once you get knack tools out, it's very hard to shut down his economy because he can be all around the map. He can spawn to defend those economies with the knack tools, and he can kind of get out of control and ramp up really fast like that. But you have to get to that point, and you have to get to that point while you're assuming that you're being focused and that you need to get early map control as well, because once the Zerg start getting upgrades, they outscale your infested marines pretty fast. So you want a decent amount of gas income early on, while also a decent amount of map control early on. You very much want decent gas income early on because your economy is gas expensive, and knack tools even more so. I put him below Sergeant Hammr. Despite being more reliable, Sergeant Hammer's speed, I'd say, beats him out when it comes to ranking. I would put him in B tier, I'd say. And when it comes to his win condition, incredible pusher, incredible baser, incredible hunter trapper. He's pretty good at those. He just needs the eco to get there. Technician, probably one of the worst when it comes to a solo gameplay for a Masters or GM player. Easy to focus down. Takes too long, way too long to get to his win condition. Once he does get to, the mineral amount required for his win conditions, it takes too long to set up. So especially when you're being focused, they might see you, for example, basing as a main win condition. They might see that getting set up and immediately come to it. You need so long to set it up. When it comes to a map control strategy, it's a lot easier to set up, but relies very much on team. Technician is another builder that is very much, in my mind, a support builder. He's great at supporting, he's great with synergizing, but he's terrible with solo play. There's some very powerful synergistic strategies. Some that I think are actually overpowered, or one that I think is overpowered, which is an early hold the wall strategy, which I it's a bit difficult to go into, but I'll try and set that up at some point in the future and showcase how that works. But you definitely need at least one teammate, and that teammate needs to fulfill a very specific set of roles to make it work. For that, Technician, although I have to mention, similar to Spirit, economy isn't entirely reliant on gas, not as much as Spirit. You don't require gas, and you actually do fine without gas as Technician, but you do get a lot of value from, income-wise, from outposting. Not as much as AFK ecoing, but it just gives a bit of extra benefit to you being the one getting the map control, while also being expected to have the in-game or late game. But he's just far too slow, and for that I would probably put him somewhere down here. I'd probably rather see that over a Dark Templar, but maybe not a Team Nova or a Scion. Funnily enough, kind of a similar role to Dark Templar in some ways. He can kill the Zerg if you give him like an hour, but he needs that hour. He can fill up the map with turrets, but then he can't really solo carry, so he's down there. Warfield, he's up here right off the bat. Funnily enough, when it comes to the lower rank players, I reckon if you ask lower rank Warfield players how easy it is to focus a Warfield, most of them would say it's like probably the easiest in the game, and that's for fair reason. It is fairly easy in some ways. If one of the Zerg isn't paying like 100% attention to you, and then the other Zerg isn't also paying some of their attention, usually you're going to be able to escape them while also building up your eco and then outscaling them because they chase you. Basically, Zerg need to both play very well while also focusing you, while also getting either somewhat lucky or being able to predict your economy, because if you get away with even one outhouse with economy in it, you can just outscale them while they spend all their time chasing you because they're not getting gas anywhere else really. So for that, Warfield ranks pretty highly amongst his pros to him, because the con of being, in quotation marks, easily focused is actually fairly reliable to get away with, to negate when you're playing him with more experience and skill, especially because he has the unit Herc, which can build economy or build around the map. It can be made from a barracks that doesn't have to be near your Warfield, and it can recall units. And one of the strongest aspects of Warfield, you can get a mini base eco, have like 3 or 4 outhouses in there, fill it up, put units in them, ton of economy. You get attacked by like a tier 2 unit ball or a ling ball, you just take them out, you stem with Herc, kill everything and get fed. So they actually can't clear your eco unless they send something like a hunter. If they send hunter, what do? You just take out all your units or your economy, teleport them across the entire map. So he's pretty much got free eco defense and free eco salvage, almost free, and it's incredibly powerful. He also has fast scaling eco, which means he can hit his win conditions early on, and he has 2 very good win conditions, one being basing and the other being pushing. Often you see Warfield's basing, it's the easier one to pull off, but it's also one that requires some team to help you with. You're not going to be able to solo hold a base versus good Zerg. Early on they can simply spam tier 2 units and they will be able to beat you even if you're ahead on eco and they're behind, as long as they play well. And then late game, you get absolutely crushed by Banes, Somps, and Megalisks now as well. Basically, late game Zerg unit comp just destroys you without much contest. So a playstyle that I like to use a bit more often, and I find a bit more reliable, is an all-sides push with him, where you're using Warfield, getting that fast economy, spamming barracks and planetary fortresses around the map. Planetary fortresses giving some map control because you can't ling ball them or anything, so you don't even need like a mini base eco with a bunch of units and Hercs there, but it also gives you that supply, that max supply up to 300, and then just overwhelming them with a ton of Murloc Marines, sentry bots, and then you can also use the hero Warfield, because if you have good reaction time or good micro, he's pretty safe and has good level scaling, especially once he hits level 6 with that tank. Can use Hercs for stem, all that. He has a very strong 2 sets of win conditions, 2 sets of reliable win conditions that come very, very early in the game. So these are the 3 builders I don't have much experience with, particularly Aewyn I've never played. Engineer and Swann I have only played in past versions of the game where they've been changed a lot by now. particularly Swann. Engineer's not that much different, but he's different enough that I can't say that I am confident on what I know about him. But Aewyn, I love when I have a good player on my team that picks Aewyn and they know how to play Aewyn. That's all I know. I don't know how to play the class. I don't really know the intricacies of the class very much. But when I have a Diamond, or in this case Master and GM player that knows how to play Aewyn, chances are that game's going to go very well for survivors because Aewyn is incredible at getting map control. He's surprisingly incredible at basing. He hits his timings pretty fast. He has a fairly easy way of getting vision on his units because it comes from his economy. However, I have seen or heard people talking about how he can be a bit luck reliant due to how his economy spawning works. I think it's been changed a little bit, not too long ago, so I'm not 100% sure. But at the end of the day, Aewyn is a great pusher, a great baser. He's good at doing them early, very similar to Warfield. Except I find, or I imagine, he's harder to focus. So I'll probably put him above. He's harder to focus. I can't move this around, there we go. Harder to focus both his hero because it's flying, although it's a bit slow, so if they get to the point where they have Hydras and Corruptors, maybe a Dahaka with Hydras, could be a bit dangerous. But usually you hit your timings around that time anyway. His economy is hard to focus, and he kind of performs quite similar to Warfield. I'd say Warfield is stronger at what he does, or maybe faster at what he does, but Aewyn is, because he's harder to focus, that much more harder to focus, I would probably have to rank him a bit higher. Although take that with a grain of salt, as I've literally never played the class, just basing it off what I've seen from teammates. And Aewyn's got some really interesting synergies and stuff, because he can give allies XP, he can give ally units some form of chrono, so he can be very good at synergistic roles as well. Engineer, I'd probably rank him around the same area as Sergeant Hammr. Not sure, I'd probably put him a bit lower. So Engineer has a unique form of economy where you can pick it up and float it, so you don't have to ever salvage. And, you know, unless they get Hydras or Corruptors, they're usually not going to be able to kill your economy as long as you're diligent. And even if they do get Corruptors and Hydras or Brooders, your economy is really tanky, so they often can't pick a lot of it off unless they spend a lot of time focusing it. But even then, you've got a move speed upgrade for floating economy, which I reckon is worth investing in if you are prone to getting focused. So he's got hard to shut down economy from that standpoint, but then at the same time, when it's floating, it doesn't make you income. Back when I played Engineer, long time ago, before he was he wasn't that much different back when I played him, but he was a bit different. I would play against some good Zerg players. I remember I used to do like a pretty consistent 13-minute base that could hold pretty much solo with Odins and Starport Walls and SCVs versus both Zerg going to attack it right away. But then I started playing against some really good Zerg players that picked up on how to counter it. I remember Pause and I remember Clydebot finding out how to counter it by focusing really, really heavily on patrolling lings. And what that would do was deny Engineer, or at the time me, of being able to float my eco and then place it. So I'd be stuck with eco in the air that isn't making income. I'd have a hard time making outposts because that's another important thing. They would patrol low ground corners or high ground corners, places that an Engineer wants to make an outpost. So it'd be hard to get gas, it'd be hard to get minerals. So if you've got one or two Zerg, or one really good Zerg hard focusing you, you're going to have a pretty hard time. But I reckon it's pretty rare that they can get away with that. I haven't really, like, I've seen some allies play Engineer, no Masters or GMs, I don't think. So I'm kind of basing it nowadays off of Diamond players mostly. But they can mostly reliably get away with some economy. He's got a higher tier economy structure now, so he doesn't need huge groups of, oh, that's another way I would play, that's right. This was before starports that I used to play, or before starports were preferable. I'd mass factories. So I would have like 200 to 400 eco structures. And then starports became more common and I'd use those. So that cuts it down to just like 20 income structures. But now he's got an even higher tier income structure. I don't know the exact stats on it, but I do see people go for it and it seems worth it because then you only have a few you have to worry about and it's hard to shut down with ling patrols, funnily enough. So it is more reliable now, it seems. Diamondback pushes a great strategy to end out the game. Basing, he's incredible at. Diamondback pushes with Widow Mines especially. You don't see many people mix in Widow Mines because it's a bit hard to micro, but if we're assuming GM or Masters player, they'll probably be mixing those in, and it makes up for one of the biggest weaknesses of Diamondbacks, which is losing to Lings. He's a great baser, whether it be with his buildings, being able to wall stuff with starports, his single target damage with Odins, his splash damage with Widow Mines. Sion's vessels are a surprisingly good unit. The heal's alright on them, but their irradiate's very strong versus tier 2 unit balls. Putting a radiate on, some Hydras, and it will just melt them. His hero, it can be easy to focus, I suppose, in some scenarios, which puts him down a bit. But usually you're going to get away with living the whole game as Engineer. Because the Engineer itself can jump up and down cliffs, but it is very slow. So it can be a bit hard to live versus Dahaka mid-game if he knows where you are and there's very little map control. And also bad rocks for survivors, so a lot of open paths, a lot of open ramps. But out of that niche scenario, outside of that, often pretty easy to live on the class. So it's a very good class. It has flashlights as well, and creates some pretty good map control early on for his economy. Gas heavy economy, has great outposts early on. You can't ling ball them really, but then once lings get some upgrades, they outscale Widow Mines pretty hard until you hit like a basing stage, or until like ling balls come by so that multiple Widow Mines can go off at once. But it slows down your gas farm basically. But yeah, some very good map control early on, and I reckon it's fair to place him here around the same spot as these three, probably in the middle. Yeah, I'd say here's fair. Round top of B rank. Swann is a class that's been changed a lot. Got changed from a support to a builder. Still shares basically the same role, funnily enough, but usually you don't want to see more than 2 people on him, so he almost acts like a support still. He just doesn't lose when all the other builders die, which is very nice. But because he still acts very much like a support, I don't really think that he's very good for a Masters or GM player to play. He's good for lower ranks, because Swann, in my opinion, has some very strong abilities, or capabilities rather, with map control and walling and bases and such. But when it comes to soloing or being the carry of a team, I would probably put him above DJ here, probably below Nomad. I would not say that I don't think he'd be consistently carrying. I've certainly not played it much. I haven't seen any high-level player play it at all, I don't think. Maybe once or twice with the newest version. But since he hasn't changed that much from the support version, I do have a pretty good understanding of how he works. And it is one of those things, kind of similar to Technician, but more reliable, where you are going around the map, making map control. You're able to make many bases for your economy, for allies' economy. You're able to hold a base with your walls, and he's way better and way more reliable at those things. The thing Technician has over Swann, other than some dumb strategies like Technician getting a ton of minerals and then sending to allies that could actually be useful, is that Technician has a better end game and better end game, not better late game, I wouldn't say. He's better when he gets very, very late into the game. But Swann's late game is pretty good, and Technician just is so slow that I would say it's not worth comparing too much to Swann and his end game or late game, because it's not too often that you get there, especially with Technicians not being the strongest. It's not like you can often hold out till then. So we've got this list. Now if we were to move things around, let's start from the top, because we want to put some stuff in A tier, and I reckon Spirit's definitely in A tier. I put Ares in A tier. I wouldn't put S tier. I wouldn't put Selendis in S tier. Would I say Ares is more preferable for a GM or a Masters in Spirit? I probably would, honestly. I probably would. I think being able, a Masters or GM player being able to make up for that huge weakness of Ares being clunky, of needing a ton of map control and, map awareness, and a ton of APM, being able to make up for that weakness is a huge benefit for Ares, and it causes you to be able to hit some really strong early timings, very early when it comes to all sides pushing or basing. Usually around the same time, probably now that Spirit can, except Ares comes with the benefit of actually being able to be proactive with his push, being able to, like, Spirit can't really push, he can slow push and slowly push back that creep in economy, but Ares can actually just straight up attack. So I'd say that puts it above Spirit, probably more reliable. I would probably put those two at the top. Other than that, we have Critterlord, Aewyn, Warfield, Selendis. Selendis I kind of want to put closer to down here. She's reliable, she has great strengths, but the speed of these three is so important to a high rank player for a consistent game, for consistent strength, that I'd say these three outrank it. Critterlord, I think, needs too much team reliance. He's very strong, and he's very strong solo, but it's difficult to really close out that game without your team doing, at least something. And sometimes that can be very much hard for the team to do when they're not too experienced, and you're playing Critterlord, potentially feeding 10k gas by 20 minutes with lava crabs or chickens. Critterlord feeds a ton of gas, and for the less experienced players in the lobby, they might not know how to deal with high upgrade Zerglings. Usually the enemy won't have a lot of minerals, because they'll be needing to spawn a bunch of stuff to deal with you, whether it be around the map, a base, or a push. So they'll usually be stuck on a few tier 2 units or Ling spam, but they will have 3-3 and like maxed upgrades, and it can be hard for newer players to know how to counter that. So I'd say that puts them down here. These two, just great at their job, very fast at it. Now I've got this. I reckon I'm pretty happy with this. I think this is how I would want it. C rank, we have, I'd reckon that's, maybe I'd put Kevin above Ascendant. I think I'd do that. Because I think Rattlesnake can hit his timings early enough to really contribute a decent amount to the game, more often than an Ascendant would. Things like AoE in a base or single target damage to Hunter, whereas Ascendant either takes too long to get to his timings, or both takes too long in my opinion, and then his units just aren't that great for their cost. So I'd say it's around here. Alarak, I'd put there. He just is anything other than early game just isn't realistically strong. But his early game is very much strong enough to be potentially worth for a Masters or GM player to play, because you could close out the game in that early to early mid game. Whereas with these, it's a bit less likely, even though they have a better late game or in game. Mira, I would probably say stronger than DJ. DJ, I'd put like, after the nerfs, it's kind of hard to say. I want to put him below this, but probably not. Okay, we're assuming GM and Masters, right? We're assuming you get focused a bit, if not a lot. But we're also assuming your team is very likely to die or have a hard time fulfilling their win conditions. So I'd say it still places above something like the supports here. I think I'm pretty happy with this. I reckon that's it, yeah. I'd say that's it. If you guys found this interesting, feel free to let me know if you'd want me to do a Zerg tier list or a tier list for different ranks. I know basing a tier list on gold ranks got a decent amount of votes. So if that's something people would be interested in, let me know, and I'll make another one and do it with that. So yeah, thanks for watching.